What the? All right, let's get started. I love that it's been like 2 weeks that this monitor's been broken and no one has come to fix it, and there's just apparently nothing to be done. I don't know why that amuses me so. I don't get to leave Tori like ever anymore. I'm trapped in here all the time. So I just get to deal with the failing technology museum. They used to book classes for me like in CSIS, and it was like walking into a different university where things are beautiful and shiny and things work. And I taught one time in ECA, and it was like, oh my God, everything works in this room. I don't know why. It's beautiful. Not this class though. That was SOS 100. All right. Okay. So, a couple of things, I guess, to kind of, I don't know if address. I'm working diligently, if slowly, through your major labs. I am going to guess either end of this week or early next week, you'll get them back. So no big deal there. As we talked about last week, the lab got canceled because L'Oreal was sick and I wasn't able to make it here in order to do it. So we're going to make that up this week, which I know is less than ideal because based on student emails, at least 70% of students are leaving for some kind of holiday today or tomorrow and skipping the rest of the week. Sorry, I had a little problem with the scheduling on my exam in SOS of Religion. The problem is I'm dumb. And I got the date wrong in my own head, and I thought it was on Wednesday, but it was actually supposed to be today. And then students are like, but I'm leaving for holidays. And I'm like, well, we have 2 other classes this week. Anyway, so some large percentage of students is leaving for some kind of holiday this week at some point. So I know having the lab on Thursday is not ideal. The other thing that I am going to do is it kind of put us in an awkward situation because we should have had sort of 2 labs after the break, but more feedback than, getting feedback more quickly on things like research question and interview questions. Because now the first mini lab isn't due till the Sunday after reading week, or the Sunday at the end of reading week rather, what I'm going to do is we're going to do the lab. You're going to give me your research questions on the Sunday at the end of reading week. And then we're going to do one more lab. And I have combined mini lab 5 and 6 into mini lab 5, which I may rename super mini lab 5 or something. I don't know. So that basically that one, instead of being worth 10, is going to be worth 20. And it's going to combine basically what I was going to do on mini lab 5 and 6. So, the Thursday after we come back from reading week, you'll do your last in-person lab, and then I'll sort of figure out what it looks like, drop-in sessions after that. And that's like doing a sample interview schedule, not Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? Questions, and basically trying to think through a mixed methods approach to your research question. And I'm just trying to bundle it so that, because otherwise that last lab, it was going to be like days before the final assignment was due. And I was hoping to kind of speed the transition up so you'd actually get feedback in time to do something with it rather than like a day and a half before it's due. And then you either have to ignore it or change elements of your major lab too. So yeah, basically I'm going to say we have 2 labs left, and then it's going to be like drop-in sessions or just canceled and whatever, no big deal. So I will officially revise the schedule when I have 2 seconds to do so. But I just wanted to kind of let people know that that's what's going to happen. I love that these numbers have no context. I'm just going to write numbers. 500, 1,000, 4, I don't know. Just confuse the people watching online later. Okay, so that's just kind of what we're doing going forward with those. And like I said, working this week on getting you the feedback on your major lab. One, and like I said, hopefully this week, I have some time tomorrow. I'm trying to like get through the backlog as quickly as I can. Plus, I have more exams coming in other classes, which I'm like, why do I do this to myself? I hate myself a lot. Too many assignments, too many. I should always just put one assignment in every class worth 100%. And it's like, did you do great? Nope. Did you do, did you do bad? Yep. Okay, that's your grade. No, that would be, I think, violating some kind of student code of conduct. Anyway, or professor code of conduct. All right, so that's kind of what we're doing going forward. Still, if you want to see midterm, right, midterm 1, I'm around. You can come and see your first midterm up to, when we get to the final exam. But please don't wait until the last week because it gets kind of crazy. Aside from that, let's talk something else. Okay, so we finished up with interviews on Friday. I think we don't have any questions about that, but if you do, feel free to ask anytime. We're going to jump into our next kind of big section of kind of qualitative. Okay, to be fair, this one can be both quantitative and qualitative, but if you want to do content analysis, you're a crazy person because it's really, really boring. But you can do quant and qual for content analysis. We're going to talk about it mostly as a qualitative method, but I'll mention a few of the ways you could do it quantitatively as well. Now, content analysis, I feel like in sociology, to a degree, gets a really bad rap. It's something that I think you would find much more commonly in some other kind of humanities and social science disciplines, particularly something like English, film studies would use essentially pretty much all content analysis when you get right down to it. Media, media studies and communication studies also would use a lot. You would see some of it. Probably history and classics, right, would have a lot. History and classics. I'm just writing disciplines now. History and at U of A history, classics would all use these quite a bit, and maybe anthropology, right? I don't know about psychology. I try to avoid thinking about psychology as much as possible because as a sociologist, the only time I interact with it in major ways, it has something to do with Freud, and I simply don't like that much. Okay, so when it comes to content analysis, what you're dealing with in a lot of cases is, examination and coding of documents, text, and media outputs. And this is one of those things where, someone's been in English and film studies or in some kind of content analysis discipline because they start to refer to everything as a text, right? If you have a photograph, that's a text. A book, that's a text. A TV show, that's also a text. A tweet, or is it an X now? What do they call them now? I don't know. Who cares? That's also a text, right? You start to think about everything in terms of content or textual analysis, right? So, I'm going to probably start using the word text just randomly because to some extent this is one of the traditions I was sort of trained in. And so, if I start just talking about the text, I want you to know what I'm saying. And I realize I probably should have mentioned that in critical media studies because I'm sure I've been using the text all over the place, and my students are probably like, I don't know what you're talking about. What text? Okay, so you can do this for almost anything, right? So when you do content analysis, you can do it for almost any kind of written, visual, audio-visual content, right? Whether it be, you know, a photograph, a movie, a hit song, an advertisement. Anything is open for kind of content analysis, and there's different ways of doing it, which we will talk about. Okay, but when we do content analysis, right, the kind of array of things you can look at is vast, and of course, the big advantage of any kind of content analysis is because generally you're dealing with stuff that's out in the world, with very few exceptions. For the most part, you don't have to worry about ethics, right? So you can get your project started without ever having to go through a research ethics board kind of process. Okay, so analysis can be of printed or visual materials. And there's a bunch of questions you might ask, right? Who is the writer? Like, who is the author of the text? What is being reported or written, right? What's being represented? Where is it written? Why, was this text created? See, I used text right there. Just threw it out there. When was it written? And often, what's left out. And this is a hard one. Sometimes it's like you do this sort of mirror thing. It's like, this is what was represented. And then you do, and this is what is absent. Or sorry, this is absent. And so you see a lot of, like, when you look at Hollywood movies or television shows, or anything like that, right? You'll look at a lot of things, and ask kind of what's being represented and what's absent, right? And sometimes, this is to determine power, like who has power and how are they using that power to create certain discourses. And we'll talk about discourse analysis as we get forward in this unit. But right, a lot of this, especially kind of post-Foucault, post-Barthes, post-Foucault, you're looking for representations of power in how things are written down, what ideas are presented, what are not presented, and how that reflects existing power structures, right? Yeah, now it can be quantitative or qualitative, as I said. Oh, video time. I don't know if the sound will work. We'll find out. Or that is going to be the... It works on my laptop. Hang on. Maybe it doesn't work because the screen doesn't work. I'm going to blame that. Huh. Intriguing. There are no options for other sound devices, which I'm going to assume is a reflection of the broken audio. I think there used to be an audio cable here and someone absconded with it. That's nice of them. Okay. I don't know if you can hear it off my laptop. We're just crank the volume. It's a small room. If you can't hear, it'll be less amusing.
Welcome to another journey with Chris, where we will obtain new levels of knowledge and awesomeness. Hello, scholars. Today we're going to journey through unobtrusive research. On our journey, we're going to cover content analysis, the process of conducting a content analysis, and the strengths and limitations of content analysis. So what is unobtrusive research? It's research that does not collect data directly from people. So we're not going to interact with people whatsoever. And there's a bunch of different types of unobtrusive research, but for this class, we're just going to cover one, and that's content analysis. Content analysis is the study of recorded human communications, such as books, websites, videos, letters, text messages, tweets, and so on. Any type of recorded human communication. Generally, there are two types of content analysis. One is a conceptual analysis, which is what we're going to focus on for this class, and that's analyzing the existence and frequency of concepts within human communication. And the other is relational analysis. That's analyzing the relationship of concepts within that human communication. Okay. In content analysis, there are two types of content that can be analyzed. Manifest content. This is observable content that you can actually look at or hear or see, watch. It's right before your eyes. You can actually observe it. And the other is latent content, and that's the underlying meaning of the manifest content. Okay, let's talk about the process of conducting a content analysis. First, we have to have our research questions, and then we need to operationalize our variables. Just as a refresher, to operationalization or to operationalize our variables, it's the process of defining how a variable can be measured. Okay. Next, we would create a coding scheme. This is definitions of each of our variables and how we're going to code them within the communication that we're going to look at. So for example, let's say that my research question is, what kind of food is advertised during Saturday morning cartoons to children? Because I'm interested to see, I wonder if fast food is the big food that's advertised, or is it sugary soft drinks or sugary breakfast cereal, whatever. Let's do a content analysis and find out. So we need to operationalize our variables. So within the realm of food being advertised, let's define what that is. So within the different types of things that could be shown during those Saturday morning cartoon commercials, we have to define what is fast food. I know that we have it in our head of McDonald's or Taco Bell or whatever, but there could be more of a definition of, well, is Subway fast?
Okay, that goes on longer than I thought. Can you actually hear it okay? Okay, I just want to make sure. I'm like, if you can't hear it, that's going to be a very long 7 minutes. Okay.
Fast food, or is Pizza Hut fast food? We'll have to define that and determine that. Next, based from those definitions, we are creating a coding scheme. So this is fast food. This is how we're defining it. This is sugary beverages. That's how we're defining it, which could include juice. It could include soda. Let's operationalize. Let's define sugary foods. How exactly are we defining this so that we can code it? Next, we want to do sampling. Let's determine how many different kinds of data we want and what time frames we want to collect that data. So for this particular example, for our content analysis, the data is television shows. That's the data we want. We're going to look at television shows, Saturday morning cartoons, for example, for children. And now we want to determine what time frames we want to collect the data, the commercials for food that are shown during those cartoons. Okay, so how long do we want to collect this data? Are we going to look every Saturday morning for a year? Are we going to look at just for a month? What channels should we look at? Maybe we only want to look at 3 different television channels and the shows within those channels. We'll need to determine all of this so that we can sample the data. Next, we want to do coding. So once we've sampled when we're going to collect the data, what channels, and so on and so forth, we're going to look at our coding scheme, and we are going to code. So we're going to watch those TV shows. When the commercials come on, we're going to code. We're going to say, is it fast food that's being advertised? Is it sugary soft drinks or sugary cereal? Or maybe it's fruits and veggies. Maybe it's milk. Whatever it is, we're just going to code it during that sampling time frame. Then we're going to quantify the codes. So we're doing a conceptual analysis in this example. We're going to look at all the codes we made, and we're going to tally them up. We're going to sum them up and create a summary of what our codes were. And then we get to write about it in our final report. What percent of the commercials were for fast food? What percent were for healthy foods like milk or fruits and veggies, things like that, or sugary soft beverages. And we're just going to give basic descriptive statistics such as summary, averages, what percent were what type of commercial. So the strengths of content analysis is that it's unobtrusive. We're not going and collecting data from people. We're just watching TV, or we're looking through newspapers or certain magazines, whatever it is related to our research question. We're not dealing with people directly. Another strength of that is that it can be low cost. We don't have to pay people to fill out a survey. We don't have to have several researchers. It's pretty low cost. And this also allows for quantitative and qualitative research. Because a lot of content analysis is looking at certain texts like magazines, newspapers, we can take out whole quotes and do qualitative research as well with content analysis. The limitations of content analysis is that it's time consuming. It can take a long time to figure out our coding scheme, go and collect data and code it for however long that takes. Usually takes quite a while. And there can be coding errors, especially with relational analysis, relating how the different codes relate to each other. And different people might code differently. Also, sometimes when people do content analysis, they may not take into context what they're coding. Depending on the magazine or newspaper or whatever it is we're looking at, if we're just looking for certain words within our coding scheme, that might not necessarily take into the bigger picture, the context of what's being said. Okay, in conclusion, content analysis is unobtrusive research. That's the studying recorded human communications. There's different types of content analysis and different types of content that can be analyzed. Thanks for a great journey, and I'll see you in class.
No, don't play that again.
You know what? I've probably seen that like 10 times, and yet it never occurred to me that he says scheme every single instead of scheme. And I'm now like questioning everything about my life. I'm like, is scheme like a Canadian pronunciation? Is there a different pronunciation? Or is this guy just pronouncing it wrong? I don't know. Anyway, I have no idea why that jumped into my head. Okay, just maybe listening to it while I checked email on my phone. There's a lot, by the way. Okay, so documents, right? When we talk about documents in terms of things you can study, documents or texts, especially when we're dealing kind of sociologically, the sorts of things that we tend to look at, it can be any source of data that can be read, right? And read can be constructed in an equally kind of broad way to the word text. You can read a TV show by watching it really carefully. So anything that can be read, can be a document that you can look at. I mean, in the social sciences, we're probably, more interested in things like, letters, diaries, autobiographies, photographs, corporate documents, policy statements, these sorts of things than we would be in, say, film and television. Though certainly, I feel kind of like that Edgar Allan Poe story, The Telltale Heart, except this is the telltale hammering and drilling. Is it in my head or is it real? I don't know anymore. And it's only this class. I have a class right over there earlier in the day, and I never hear anything. This is like they must be working directly overhead. Frustrating. Okay. And it's 2 floors up. The sound just travels. Oh, sad. What was I saying? Nothing. There's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. No, it's very important social science information. Okay, yeah, we tend to deal with this more, though certainly, there are sociologists, of media who deal with more media text. Okay, so an important thing, when we talk about a text that we're studying from this perspective is, generally speaking, it's something that was not produced for the purposes of social research, right? You're taking something that's, kind of out in the world that was produced, basically that was produced for consumption in some way, or even, to be private if we're talking about diaries. Okay, and yeah, one of the things that video brings up is content analysis is a very unobtrusive method, and so you don't ever really have to worry about reactivity. I'm going to cross it out. You don't have to worry about it. Why? Because
obviously you're not interacting with the creators of any of these texts while they're making it, so you could not do anything to affect the content, which is why, you know, it can be really useful. Okay, so how do we assess the quality of documents? And this is, I think, you know, I always kind of thought, wow, who cares, right? You find a document, good enough. But especially in kind of the online era where, you know, bad actors are generating fake things all the time, these become more important questions, I think. Okay, so when we talk about authenticity, is the text in question genuine and of unquestionable origins, right? So do we know where it came from? Are we sure that it's genuine? Like, do we know for sure who wrote it? Like, who was the author? You know, what was their intention? I feel like this is, you know, this can be important in sociology. This is especially important in history, and I'll give you a weird example. So, have you all heard of the book and the movie The Da Vinci Code? Okay, so there's a weird thing with the Da Vinci Code. The Da Vinci Code is based on, in part, this other book called Holy Grail and Holy Blood. Weirdly, I have a copy in my office, which I found in one of those little libraries in my neighborhood. And I was like, I don't know why this is here, but I'm going to take it, both to protect people and because cool. But it all focuses around this sort of story of this group that was created called the Priory of Sion, which protects the Holy Grail. And the Holy Grail is really the child of Jesus and his bloodline, you know, and especially, you know, as it happens, you know, the kings of Europe were all kind of related to Jesus. And so, you know, the Holy Grail, or the, you know, is all about finding this pure bloodline of Jesus. Now, why this is funny and why it has to do with authenticity is because in the 1960s, this guy, his name is Pierre Plantat, he basically invented this idea of the Priory of Sion. It had never been seen before in history or this whole story, but very funny because he's a weird dude. You know, his name is Pierre. Oops, I don't know what I did there. He basically found a bunch of old parchment, and he had some manufactured, and he wrote down the story of the Priory of Sion. And because he was a historian, he then traveled around Europe and would go into like historical archives, and he would like slide his copies of this story into the archives, right? And then he would send one of his graduate students back into that archive and tell them exactly where to look. And lo and behold, they discovered these lost texts of the Priory of Sion. And so for a while, right, it was this big scandal of people being like, oh my gosh, there's this lost thing in this conspiracy theory. And then, you know, they did the smart thing and they did like analysis of the ink, and they found actually it's not from the Middle Ages. It was manufactured in France in 1958. And they carbon dated the parchment, and, you know, it carbon dated from 3 weeks ago. But this is, so, you know, he was widely discredited, and yet people still believe this. And Dan Brown wrote the most profitable novel ever written by a functional illiterate, and made millions and millions and millions of dollars off of it. So all based on this. So this is, you know, a funny kind of story because it's a little bit ridiculous, and going in and planting your own archival evidence is, you know, a little funny. But that's kind of what we are worried about when we take, say, historical documents especially, or even, oh, okay. I should tell you this other story. I cannot remember the scholar's name, but it's an American criminologist. And it's really bad. But basically, you know, so he's this very famous criminologist. And for some reason, I can't remember his name, but he wrote a book. And basically, one of the things that's in his book is he talks about how, you know, he made friends with these drug dealers, I believe in Philadelphia. And then he moved to New York because he got a job at NYU. You know, as his parting gift was basically the ledger with all of the drug transactions from the gang that this person was in. And you know, he'll say, "Oh, that gang member 2 weeks later was killed, so you can't ask him and check." And then, so he wrote this whole book about, you know, these drug transactions and the drug economy in Philadelphia. And then, you know, he said to protect the gang's sources, and so he wouldn't be arrested, he burned it. Which any, I think, reasonable person would be like, dude, you fibbing. Like, this is not a true story. But it's actually a very famous criminological study, and people take it more seriously than I think it should be. But this is another kind of, you know, authenticity question. Can you actually, you know, verify, you know, where the source of his information was from? Was it authentically the gangs of Philadelphia, or, you know, did he just kind of make it up? So it's very important. We're talking about, you know, any kind of document. Is it authentic, right? Can we verify who wrote it, where it came from, that is genuine, that we're not making it up? I don't want to say scholars sometimes, you know, it can be career making to make something up, or maybe you want to write yourself into history. Oh, by the way, the person who was supposed to be the next king of Europe was, by strange coincidence, a little man named Pierre Plantin. It pointed, all his documents pointed back to him being, you know, the true heir of Jesus Christ. So, you know, funny thing that. But yeah, authenticity, an important criteria assessing documents. Are, you know, if you're saying that, you know, you found a new play of William Shakespeare, can you actually say that this was Shakespeare, right? Or a letter written by Winston Churchill, you know, you have to verify the authenticity of it and make sure that it's of unquestionable kind of authenticity. Okay, I'm going to erase my little doodles. Thank you for going with me on a strange journey through authenticity. Okay, credibility. Yeah. Now, this was one of those, you know, the quality of a document. If it's, you know, you want to see, is it free from error or distortion, or is it factually accurate? Now, of course, people aren't always going to, you know, people have their own distortions. You know, they perceive things in weird ways. So when we talk about the credibility, you'll talk about the credibility of the account. The fact that, you know, maybe you have a document that doesn't have, you know, it's retelling the Kennedy assassination, and, you know, from a conspiracy theory point of view, it might lack credibility, but it might be interesting for its, as a document, for its very lack of credibility. But you want to kind of determine whether you have, you know, what would be a credible account or a non-credible account, and it's going to have implications for how you deal with, you know, a historical document or some kind of text that you're working with. Okay. Okay, that one's easy. Representativeness. And again, this can go two ways. Is it typical or is it atypical? And both of them can, atypical. Both of these can actually be quite interesting to work with, right? So if you're talking about, you know, whether a document or a text is representative of a particular thing, if it is, right, you'll say that it's typical, right? It's very close to others that we have, you know, in the same sort of genre. And so, you know, that lends it an air of credibility, an air of usefulness, and you can say this is very typical, and so it adds into larger accounts. Now, atypical ones, or you might say outliers, are also interesting because, you know, if they are, say, authentic, particularly authentic, less credible, outliers can be interesting because they can show you kind of alternative views, alternative accounts of things, alternative kind of styles of documents. So both of them can, you know, whether it's representative or not representative, it can be interesting to have both types of documents because, you know, I don't know, if you have movies, right, you have a bunch of movies that are all kind of typical of a genre and one that is kind of very different. It's atypical of the genre, or it's an outlier. They can both tell you interesting things about what was happening at the time, the way people were thinking, and how people were maybe, you know, trying to break out of these typical kind of boxes. So it can give you that alternative account. So they can both be useful. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Talking about textual analysis is less fun than doing it. Okay, and meaning. Is it clear and comprehensible? And that's like, you know, can you understand what's being said? Is it basically intelligible at the end of the day, right? And sometimes, you know, like, the reliability of the person who wrote it can be a question when it comes to meaning and clarity, because occasionally, right, this happens sometimes with historical figures who know that they're going to be famous. They, oh, how to put it, know that scholars are going to be studying them later, and so they just kind of want to mess with you. And so sometimes they will actively say things that they know aren't true because they're playing games with their future scholars and people that they assume are going to be kind of, you know, looking at their diaries. Nabokov was famous for this. So Vladimir Nabokov, that's an O, who amongst other things is famous for writing the book Lolita. If you've never read Lolita, don't. It's a very disturbing novel about Humbert Humbert, who falls in love with the prepubescent daughter of a woman he ends up marrying mostly so that he can get into proximity with that prepubescent daughter, which he then basically murders the mother and continues to live basically with that daughter while he sexually abuses her until she runs away. It is a very disturbing novel, and I've never quite understood what Nabokov was trying to get at while doing it. But it's, you know, it's considered a fabulous work of art for some reason. It's been made into 2 different movies, and they're very interesting. Anyway, Nabokov very famously knew how famous and important he was as a literary figure, and so he wanted all of his manuscripts and diaries destroyed by his son, who apparently is kind of a dick and didn't do it, because he figured later on he could sell his dad's stuff. I wonder if the guy who wrote Lolita had a weird and bad relationship with his own children. Let's not ponder that. But Nabokov also put in a bunch of clear trapdoors and false alleys in his own diaries to trick future biographers into thinking a bunch of things that clearly aren't true. So, you know, reliability of the text and whether the person is trying to fool you can be an interesting question. Now, not everyone's as playful as Nabokov. Best not to think too much about his playfulness, I suppose. But, you know, you do have to ask this question, like, is the person generating the text generating them in an honest way? Very famously, and actually I think tragically, Freud himself burned all of his diaries, which is either the greatest thing he ever did or the worst, because, you know, I am curious what was in that guy's head sometimes. And yet, at the same time, probably for the best. Okay, moving on. Okay, so personal documents, what can we use? Diaries, and this is a very, very, very common historical method. You know, if we want to use, you know, we want to find out about people from an era, we can use diary entries or letters, right? Now, this is probably one, I suppose this is not something that anyone will be able to do in the future unless somehow they can download all of our text messages, which would be kind of wild. But most of that is probably lost now. But right, people used to write letters to each other back and forth. You know, they'd move out west to Western Canada and write for years back to mom who lived back in Hamilton. So diaries, right? People's personal accounts. Very useful sources of information, especially because they are typically pretty unguarded, right? Dear diary, you don't lie to your dear diary. You are generally pretty honest about it and self-reflexive. So most of the stuff that's in there is really useful. And so for like reconstructing historical periods, reconstructing the lives or the relationships of famous figures, diaries are super useful. To the point where, oh, I don't know if this is still true because they've gotten rid of so much that was in the collection before. But if you go up to like the 5th floor of Rutherford Library, at one point they had the entire collection of the diaries of Fyodor Dostoevsky. right? It's like this big on the shelf. It's a huge amount of text. Why? Because, and it's all in Russian. So, I mean, you could go look at it. I don't know how much good it would do you, but it was really interesting, right? Not that I spent a lot of time reading Dostoevsky's diaries, but I remember walking through and being like, oh, that's really weird. So that people will collect these and publish them later, right? Because they're such an unguarded source of interesting things. Dostoevsky, by the way, very anti-Semitic and very anti-Catholic. So, you know, be warned if you ever want to read his diaries. They have also been translated. I don't know if the library has them in the collection, though. So they're very unguarded, right? And you can get a really clear look at a historical period. If you gather a bunch of people's diaries, you know, you can read their own reflections. And the same thing with letters, right? They're very contemporaneous. People are usually saying what's happening at a particular moment in time. So they can be very useful historical documents for recreating particular periods. And like I said, that's probably something that like from like 1997 on is going to disappear completely because all of that is now done by email and text message, and most of that is going to disappear. However, the website that I built in high school, and I'm not going to tell you what it was for, but it was nerdy, is still preserved somewhere on the Internet Archives. So apparently that's never going away. And I look forward to the day where I get to read about my own crappy website. Okay, autobiographies, also useful in the sense that obviously it's people writing about themselves. I would say tends to be, well, there's a little bit more of a, you know, sense of self-presentation. And not every, you know, I mean, you can read, say, Bill Clinton's 17 autobiographies and Barack Obama's, like, I think he has like 5 autobiographies or memoirs, you know, and there's a lot of spin in them. Weirdly, Donald Trump doesn't have an autobiography. He has his book, The Art of the Deal, which I've never read, but I think might be fascinating. But he's probably not that interested in writing an autobiography. I look forward one day to the 17 autobiographies written by Justin Trudeau. Why I am the best and always will be. Also, Pierre Poilievre is a big stupid head. Neener, neener, neener. I think that will actually be the title. Okay, so autobiographies. And then visual objects, you know, pictures. If you've ever seen like, the CBC used to do these, and they're kind of old now, but they used to do these like people's histories, right? Like they did Canada, a people's history, and hockey, a people's history. And they would dig through archives to find old pictures of like people playing pond hockey, right? Visual objects that kind of illustrate particular moments in time. You know, you have magazine engravings as well. But all of these things, right, are usually kind of, you know, I don't know why I drew these different lines. They're useful, especially for recreating kind of historical circumstances, right? And historical moments. And the more you have of them, the bigger history you can tell. But like I said, I think this is really common in history. Less so, I think, in sociology and other social sciences. But definitely history uses a lot of these. Okay. So, yes. Applying Scott's criteria. It's authenticity. Did the author actually write the piece? So, again, there are always incentives for fraud. You know, if you can find that special secret letter that Donald Trump wrote admitting to his plans to overthrow the republic, right, that would make you famous from a historical point of view. But if Donald Trump didn't write it, right, it's all just fake, you know. But you can imagine almost anything being written by Donald Trump if you just do the Donald Trump voice. I am planning to overthrow the republic on January 6th, 2020. It's going to be fabulous. I'm going to be made king. Yeah, I don't know why. Just like say things in a gravelly voice and then take like slight pauses between sentences and you sound exactly like Donald Trump. I don't know why. But right, that would not be a good way of verifying authenticity. Okay, credibility, you know, is it factual again? But, you know, does it reflect, you know, this is a good question. Does it reflect the true feelings of the author? It might not be factual, but it could reflect, you know, the true feelings of the person writing it, which gives it an air of credibility of a kind. Representativeness, right? does it, how typical is it of things written at a particular time? And the meaning, always somewhat elusive, right? Because, to quote Barthes, the author is dead. Even if the author is still alive, we can't necessarily get access. So what is the actual meaning of a text? It can be a bit elusive. Okay. I love that I had photographs, but I have no photographs. I just have the photograph logo. This is clearly an auto design feature in PowerPoint. I should really pump this up a little bit. Okay, photographs can be used. What can you use them for? So to illustrate points, right? Photographs are really useful if you're writing and you can throw in photographs, especially historical ones, to illustrate things, and be like, hey, look, I was talking about this and here's a picture of it. Very nice. You can use them as sources of data in and of themselves, right? If there's something interesting in a photograph, or if you are doing some kind of combination or mixed method where you're combining like historical methods, or you're dealing with visual objects and text, and you're interviewing people or doing focus groups, you can use them as prompts to get people to talk. And yeah, Scott maintains that family photographs are of 3 types. So again, these are principally historical, idealized, right? The formally posed. Oh my God, I'm so tired of idealized, formally posed photographs. It's become like a thing now. I have so many family members, and it's my fault for being born in a French-Canadian family. They all send me Christmas cards with their like posed family pictures, which I feel bad, but I immediately recycle every single one of those, even of like my nieces and nephews, because I don't care. Have I mentioned I'm a bad person? But like, this is the formally posed one, right? Someday they'll be rifling through the dump and find pictures of my nieces and nephews, and it'll become a historical object. But there's so many, and every year, and like a photo shoot. Why do people do photo shoots for their family every year? No one cares. Or maybe that's just me. I don't know. I'm of a cynical nature. Natural portrayal, candid, not posed, right? So you're out in the world and you take pictures, and they're candid and not posed. And again, this is going to be a problem in the future because everybody now just has them on their phone. And how are historians ever going to find the things that you stored on Google Photos? Who knows? And nobody prints anything anymore. And then demystification, revealing or atypical portrayals, right? Sometimes you'll get a special photograph that just, shows a particular moment in history from a unique point of view. Or a particular historical figure in an unguarded moment, right? So you might have these kind of demystifying kind of portrayals. But those are basically, family photos into 3 categories: the obnoxious, the natural, and the, oopsie. I got caught doing something I shouldn't. Okay, how are we doing for time? 2 minutes, let's stop. We'll come back to visual objects on Wednesday. And we'll do at some point I will show you how to do this. It'll be fun. Yes. Well,